But John saw something else in this class that he thought might be useful to teachers. Evidence that students were struggling with their basic math skills.
So remember, our goal is to get x over here and all the numbers over here. So minus 8, minus 8. Now what can I do? Talk me through. Cross it out. What am I going to bring down? If I borrow $4 from you, borrow 8 more. Say I took $4 from you, then I came back and took 8 more. How much do I owe you? Negative 12. Good.
There was a point where she had to subtract negative 4, take away 8. Mm-hmm. And there was some initial hesitation from the class. People weren't quite sure what the answer was there. So some people might look at that and say, wow, students don't know their basic arithmetic. How can we possibly teach them algebra when they don't even know what negative 4 take away 8 is? I think that's actually not the right way to look at it. That students are going to continue to need support in their growth of their basic skills, their basic arithmetic, their thinking about fractions and rational numbers. Certainly we want them to have some command of that stuff, and that is related to future success in algebra, but it's always going to be something that teachers will need to work on to continue to reinforce. It makes me think about the role of prerequisite knowledge in that, yes, it's critical that students know how to work with basic arithmetic and understand what they're doing, but we can't wait to start algebra until that's there. We have to jump in and try to do a little of both.
Let's begin with you, Denise, since we came out of a segment about Norfolk and this issue of prerequisite knowledge. Prerequisite knowledge, that question came up over and over again in our pre-registration for this webcast. Obviously, it's a very hot topic out there. So I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit about it, and how do we ensure that students have the prerequisite knowledge to be successful in algebra?
There's certain things you need to do in terms of looking at the curriculum. It can't start just at middle school or when students are going to get into high school. John was right in terms of you can't wait for a child to know their basic facts or to be especially fluent with numbers to enroll into an algebra course. That cannot be the only determining factor. So what we did was we looked at the skill sets and the concepts that would be critical for students to know and be able to do by the time they got into Algebra 1. And we back mapped it in terms of looking at the curriculum in kindergarten. What are some of those things that you would see that would transcend the algebra course by looking at it as a kindergarten student all the way to, say, 7th or 8th grade. And so we hit on some specific things, looking at multiple representations of numbers, getting students to be real flexible with the idea that when you see the equal sign, it is not an action thing of putting two numbers together, so that if a child looks at the number 90, that they could also write it as 100 minus 10 is the same thing as 10 times 9. So starting that very, very early and carrying that all the way through, looking at the concept of balance, having that inequality situation appear, but also focusing on what does it mean to have two things that are actually equal to each other. And then we looked at the concept of variable. And so our elementary teachers and students have always been looking at variables. They always saw it as these little boxes or an underline as a missing term, but we wanted them to really be comfortable with the concept of a variable and using that to generalize statements when they looked at patterns, and when they looked at functions and things like that. So you have to look at the curriculum, the written curriculum, and then providing ample support for your teachers and your students in the meantime to make sure that they're successful all along the road.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Denise. Jim, can I turn to you and ask the same question from the perspective of NCTM and this issue of prerequisite knowledge?
Well, from the perspective of Jim Urbillo, I will reiterate a lot of what Denise mentioned, and that is that you have to begin and define and do a careful analysis of what are the building blocks and what are the key mathematical prerequisites you need in order to be successful in algebra, the formal algebra course. Algebraic thinking begins way before. And the other thing I noticed in the clip that I'd like to point out, that I was not so concerned at first that they couldn't do the quick response of the number. I believe the students were thinking about the context. And so that we have to be much more sophisticated as teachers to analyze what's going on, to assist them. The key to the multiple representations, in my mind, in the clip we saw another representation, the power of words, the power of context outside of class. Plus, there are many other situations where another representation of numbers is in some physical or concrete material or something where students can get the concept. So, algebra begins early, and the prerequisite skills build constantly, and the students will develop those skills through continual use, continual growth. But we keep raising the insight. The insights will grow the more representations. We all learn in many ways, and I think that's the greatest thing we've learned in the recent time in algebra, is that algebra is not just a one-way approach with symbols, but there are lots of other ways to understand and gain insight into what's behind it, rather than the manipulation, simply the manipulation of symbols.
Thank you, Jim. This, as I said, this was a very hot topic amongst our pre-registrants. And I was just looking through some of the questions that came to us. One of the questions actually is, when I have a classroom where I realize that students need assistance, what are some specific things that I can do? If I don't have a system already set up that is ensuring they have that prerequisite knowledge, what is it that I could do in class to make sure that I can move them through algebra? Mike, do you want to tackle that a little bit?
Well, I think it depends on what it is that they don't know how to do. If this is something as simple as multiplication facts, and I know we've talked about a lot of other kinds of skills, but I tend to even go back before those kinds of skills and look at very basic facts. To me, if a student can't do -4 minus 8 or can't do 4 times 3, it's like, you know, you were going to try to build a swing set or something, you know, and every time you went to do the screw, you had to go back to the manual to see, is it right or is it left? You're going to get the swing set built, but it's going to be very, very, very taxing on your patience. I think that's what happens with kids. So if it's something as simple as that, I think warm-up exercises in the class, based upon what you've seen, it might be worth taking 5 minutes out of class to do something on simple multiplication facts, or on filling in the boxes where you know that they're going to have to use variables in something. So you pre-assess what it is that they know, what they don't know, and invest that couple of minutes at the beginning of class every day, and until you build up that skill.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And if you noticed in the clip, you saw the term math review. And so within the math review, the way we've established things is that you have 5 problems that students will see on a daily basis. And it may be the equivalent of your warm-up. It could be some problems dealing with operations on integers that would be included in there. Those are the things that you know that students may be having some difficulty with, and so the teacher is going to spend 5 to 10 minutes every day to address that. And then you also look at the whole issue of time. How can you vary and build in support within the school day for students so that they are successful in algebra? In some cases, it doesn't mean that you have to go to a 1- and 2-year algebra course. It could be looking at your scheduling, and is it a possibility that there would be some classes that would be running every other day for 90 minutes, while in another situation you could have an algebra class running every day for 90 minutes, so that you can build in support for students within the school day rather than asking them to come in after school.